Hi, my name is Zachary Hausner, and I'm presenting my final project for CIS 607. And in this project, we were supposed to identify 3 questions and look at least 2 data sets to analyze that question and see if we can come up with some sort of answer. And the first question that I asked was, are men less likely to report domestic violence than women in Kansas City? The second question I asked was, do crime rates increase with population within Kansas City? And then, do violent crimes increase with population within Kansas City? Now, the first question, the data sets I used, first let's go there, was from the Kansas City Open Data. I looked at the Kansas City crime data for 2020. I also looked at the population by neighborhood. And that was conducted in 2010. So obviously population is different. And the current census data has not been uploaded yet and hasn't been processed yet. So we don't know what that is. But it still should be hold for the most part to be true for a data set if the testing all goes well. And for the first part of our question, when I asked what are men less likely to report domestic violence, that my null hypothesis was men are just as likely to report domestic violence as women. Now note, this is report. It doesn't mean that they were the victim or they knew the victim or they were the perpetrator in this. It's just stating, were they likely to report? And I used a 2-sample hypothesis test, t-test essentially. And in my sample, what I found was fascinating was that men in this sample were slightly more likely than women to report domestic violence. And so given that, we had to accept the null hypothesis. And I think this is mostly due to, one, that it's whoever called in the report as opposed to actions being done against. And that's basically it. I think that's mostly the reasons why. But it's still an interesting finding. The next one is increase in populations and crime rates. This one I had a huge trouble with. I have previously created an API that would look up an address in Google and using their mapping functions, APIs, and pull out different address key elements such as latitude, longitude, and whatever, and also allowed for neighborhood. However, Google has updated their APIs because that was being used quite a bit by companies, and now you have to, it's a pay for service. So I had to find free services and mainly pull that data. And so out of, I think it was like 290,000, I only pulled 900 addresses because I had to manually pull it one by one and search it. So the data that I was working with wasn't the best. So it's definitely lopsided. And so going into this, I knew that essentially because the data was unclean, the results were going to be unclean. And for this test, I wanted to see how those related to each other. And I ran an SPSS, a cluster analysis. Now the cluster analysis in SPSS does a few things for you, and I find it fascinating. One, it runs a correlation, and the correlation between the two was 0.0028, which is terrible. That's as far away from correlation and close to randomization I have ever seen. So that was particularly fascinating. And it also runs an R-square analysis, a regression analysis. So yeah, in the third question has the regression analysis in it, and that is I took that same data set that I used, and I pulled it down and looked at just all the violent crimes. If it was assault, if it was whether it's physical or sexual. I looked for anything that was like robbery would be a violent crime by its very nature, and I made sure to remove away like moving violations or misdemeanors of just smaller things. And this one had a rather interesting result as well. The the correlation was a little bit better. Instead of, well, actually, it's a little bit worse. It was 0.00219, and the regression was 0.0121. So they were it the data was not tied together, and that was because of, I'm very certain, because I only had to do a subset of a subset. But this brings up an interesting point. What is interesting from my understanding of statistics is that sometimes when you take a subset of a population, of a sample, that subset of the sample can be more representative of the population than the sample itself. And I can't remember exactly why that is, but I thought it was fascinating. And that's what I have for you. Thank you very much. Bye.